There really, Gail, are two. One set are external and the other are internal. The external challenges are the following. The shift of power from Western countries, in particular the United States, to countries of the East and South like China and India and Brazil, countries with large Jewish communities like the United States and Europe, to countries with non-existent Jewish communities or tiny ones, countries with Western values, which Israel and the Jewish people share with the United States, to countries which have very different shared values than Israel and the West. And that adaptation is a real challenge. The second is the force of globalization, the combination of the internet and the digital revolution, which are changing the way in which we teach, we learn, we shop, we communicate in profound ways. I think this is actually a net positive for Israel, for the United States, and for the Jewish people, because it creates a more integrated, mutually dependent world, but it is nevertheless a profound challenge, I think as significant to the world as the invention of the Gutenberg printing press 500 years ago. The third challenge is a very, very significant one, and that is the struggle for the mind of 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. This is of particular importance to Israel and the Jewish people, but the United States as well. And we're all impacted every day by this, we can see by the headlines. But Israel lives in a very difficult region, a region that's on fire in many ways. And the direction that that Muslim world takes, almost 1 out of every 6 to 7 people in the world, will have profound impacts. And with the jihadist threat, this is very real. But I make the argument that although it is a threat, it has to be met forcefully. That the overwhelming majority of Muslims want the same thing we all want: a better life for their kids, empowerment, education, a good job. But how we manage that is very important, and I think it's important not to see it as a war of civilizations between the West and the Muslim world. Indeed, if anything, it's a war within the Muslim world, a civil war between Sunnis and Shiites, between modernizers and fundamentalists, between those who want to be part of this new global world and those who want to blow it up. But the direction it takes will be profoundly important. The fourth external force is really the new effort at delegitimizing Israel as a Jewish state. This takes a number of forms: the potential boycott by European universities of Israeli universities, boycotting Israeli products made on the West Bank. The European Union is thinking of actually cutting off research and development funds for Israel because of its policies on the West Bank. This whole new threat, it's a sort of subtle form of anti-Semitism, collective anti-Semitism against the Jewish state, denying Israel the right to be a Jewish state. It's of profound importance. And most important, in a sense, is keeping the U.S.-Israel relationship strong. The internal forces are in some respects even more challenging, but I'll just put it very briefly, and that is that Israel is facing two internal challenges. One is how it can come to terms with the 2 million Palestinians under its control in the West Bank. This is of profound importance. What will Israel's ultimate boundaries be? What is its relationship to this massive population which it controls? Can it come to peace with the Palestinians when they have a weak leadership? And the second is even more of an internal challenge, and that is the, I would say, fabric of Israeli society. Now 1 out of every 8 Israelis is Orthodox, ultra-Orthodox. And it's 8%, it'll be 15% within 10 to 15 years. They're not integrated into Israeli society, they don't serve in the army, they have very high unemployment rates, and it's very important to integrate them into Israeli society, into the fabric of society. And this is a very profound challenge. So there are both external and internal challenges. I'm optimistic that they can all be overcome, but they're very real. More important, because when you see the Middle East in flames, when you see the problems in Syria, in Egypt, and in the entire Arab world, you realize that as strong as Israel is, it is heavily dependent on the United States. From my government service and my work privately, both in secular and capacities in Jewish organizations, I can say without equivocation, Israel has one and only one ally in the entire world upon whom it can depend, and that's the United States of America. So that relationship has been important, and even though Israel is much stronger than it was at the time of its formation, at a time of so much uncertainty, of so much chaos in the region, of so many challenges, of weapons of mass destruction, chemical weapons and nuclear weapons that may fall into the wrong hands, having a firm, solid U.S.-Israel relationship is vital, and I'm very optimistic this will occur because that relationship for now over 60 years is based on shared interests, shared values, a shared sense of threats with Islamic radicalism, but also as fellow democracies sharing the same kinds of values. So I think the relationship is a bipartisan relationship at a time when there is such partisan differences on almost everything. This is one of the few issues on which Democrats and Republicans agree. Well, I would amend that only by saying actually four, three on a sort of full-time basis and a fourth now in the Obama administration where I'm special advisor to the Secretary of State on Holocaust issues. But the answer is the same whether it's three or four, and that is I would strongly encourage that. I don't think there's anything more noble, Gail, than serving your country. You can do so much good by serving at any level of government, federal, state, and local. You can help people, you can deliver services, you can see the positive impact. There's really a nobility to it. It's what this country was built on. So I hope as many students as possible, even if they don't make it a career, will find ways to engage in public service. You know, public service takes a lot of forms. One of the great things about the Bob Graham Center on Public Service is that it encourages citizenship, people understanding the responsibilities of simply being a citizen, a private citizen, understanding issues, getting engaged in political affairs, contacting your members of Congress and the administration on things that are important to you. Being an informed citizen is also part of public service. So it needn't be full-time career service. It can be part-time public service in the government at any level, but it also can just take the form of being a good, informed public citizen. And that's what the Bob Graham Center is promoting, and I'm thankful for that. Well, Oslo actually spun off some positive things. It did help spin off an agreement with Jordan, and there has been more, I would say, if not a formal peace, at least more of a modus operandi with the Palestinians. Certainly it's been disappointing in its outcome. I wish I could be more optimistic about the chances for a Palestinian-Israeli settlement. I think it's very tough. We all know what the issues are. They're the so-called Clinton parameters. We know the solution. Getting there is very difficult for both governments. With the Palestinians, you have a divided leadership between a radical Hamas and a more moderate Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. They tend to checkmate each other, and the kinds of compromises that would be necessary by the Palestinians giving up their so-called right of return, which would end Israel as a Jewish state, is exceedingly difficult. On the other hand, for Israel, with the current coalition government, it's very difficult for them to make some of the compromises on settlements that will have to be made. So I think that Senator Kerry, Secretary Kerry, and the President have done a superb job in getting the parties back to the negotiating table. And I think the Secretary has been working diligently on that. But coming up with an agreement is going to be exceedingly difficult. And one of the things I was actually talking to Governor Graham about today before this interview is at least working as Secretary Kerry and the President proposed on improving the economic lot of the Palestinians, diffusing some of the pressures that come from massive unemployment. In the Arab world, over a third of the people are under 15 years of age. We've got massive youth unemployment in the Palestinian territories. That's got to be dealt with. It's really a powder keg. It's already blown up in Egypt and elsewhere in the Arab world. So dealing with the economic dimension is important. It doesn't supersede the political compromises, but at least it can help grease the wheel, so to speak. Well, without question, my most satisfying experience has been serving the United States of America in several administrations, in the White House twice with President Johnson and President Carter, and serving our country abroad as Ambassador to the European Union. And you know, Gail, it's interesting. You get a different perspective when you're the representative of your country abroad, when people see you as the embodiment of the country, when you see how dependent, even if they gripe from time to time about the United States, how dependent they are on U.S. leadership. That was a very special occasion for myself and my wife, Fran. But all of my public service has been very ennobling. That to me has been, I would say, the best. But what's unique about the United States, unique among all the countries of the world, is that it permitted me, and permits people like me, to both serve in the Jewish world and in government service, to be the leader of a number of Jewish organizations, Jewish People's Policy Institute, the American Jewish Community, and other things, and to do public service also during parts of your career. There are very few countries that would permit that, and the United States has actually encouraged it. I think enriches both communities to be able to transfer, in a sense, between leadership in one and leadership in the other. In terms of being a private attorney, I'm going to get from the American Lawyer a Lifetime Leadership Award in the next few weeks, which I'm proud of. And I'm proud of being a practicing lawyer because the rule of law is very important. But for me, as my wife has always said, the law is a way of putting bread on the table and making the opportunity to do public service in both the Jewish and general communities.